My name is Jenny, and I am the creator of the Shifting to SOAR membership and the Decodable Readers Vault. And we are going to talk tonight about some blending strategies for K-2 students. And Megan is going to be leading us. Yeah, so Megan is my number one gal here who helps out everything with the membership. And so I'm just going to hand it over to her and have her. All right, Megan, let's go ahead and get started.
Again, my name is Megan. I'm so glad to see some of you online tonight. As Jenny said, we're going to be talking about some blending strategies for K-2 students. And what I'm going to do is go through the presentation, and I have like a little demonstration that I'll do towards the end. Okay. So in today's chat, we will be defining blending and why it matters for our elementary students. We will identify maybe why some students struggle with blending. We'll talk about some strategies. I'll show you kind of how to do some blending with a blending board. And then I will share resources from our membership that you can use right away with your students to help them work on blending. So many students can say sounds, but sometimes they can't put the sounds together. So that's one of the reasons why blending is a really important skill. Weak blending can slow down your students' decoding and fluency. And so basically, we look at blending as this bridge between phonemic awareness and reading. And so one of the things that I like to say is that it's a small skill with a big impact. So you think about your students, maybe you have one in mind already, that they can say the sounds in a word. They look at the word, dog, and they can say those three sounds. But sometimes trying to put them back together can be really challenging. And so that's what this presentation is all about, to how to support that particular skill. So what is blending? Blending is putting sounds together to say or read a word. So you can see, for example, right here, when we see these sounds, k, at, that's a form of segmenting. And then when we read the word, we're blending it back together. At, cat. So again, blending is used in phonemic awareness, decoding, and spelling. When students are blending in phonemic awareness, it may be you're giving them the sounds and then they're putting it back together and blending those sounds together to say a word. When they're decoding, again, they're looking at that word and they're blending it. And then again, with spelling, they're writing the sounds they hear and then they have a word that they're creating. So here are kind of some examples of a student that may struggle with blending. And so you may look at some of these, go, yep, okay, that might be one of my students right there. And so hopefully you'll get something out of this presentation tonight. And essentially this presentation is explicit blending instruction. And so these students, they need that help in blending. So the first example, this is one of the more common ones that I've experienced, is that, you have a student who can say sounds and words, but they can't read the word. I've had students in the past, especially ELL students, that, I would say sounds and they weren't able to put those sounds together to make the word. Another example for a sign of struggle is when there's long pauses between sounds. So they may be thinking really hard on kind of what they're looking at and what they're saying. They may have the accurate sounds, but they may end up guessing the word. And if you've done any sort of fluency, like DIBELS or any other, district-wide assessments, this may be something that you notice a lot with your students, is that, they'll, especially if it's something that may be a little bit more challenging for them, accurate sounds, they can say those sounds in the words, but then they look at it and they're like, okay, robot or something, they just completely throw something else out there. And then another sign is if they're really choppy or they're reading kind of robotic. And so that can kind of be an example of a blending struggle. It's not something that I remember seeing as much with my students. The first three were something that I really did experience a lot more. That choppy robotic reading can be a sign of, just a fluency struggle. But essentially, when you think back to it, this blending is kind of that bridge again between the phonemic awareness piece and then fluency. So now I'm going to kind of go over some tips that you can use with your students that can help. You can use these with your whole class. You could use them in small groups. You could use them one-to-one. And hopefully you can find one that will work with your students. So the first one is to incorporate some movement. Movement supports memory and engagement. We know that with lots of things that we teach our students is that movement is something that is really powerful for a lot of learners and especially those younger learners. And so one thing you can do with your students is you can arm blend. And so, you have them stick their arm out and then with each sound, they're tapping their different parts of their arm and then they slide it together to say the word. So cat, at, cat. And as they're sliding down their arm, they're blending those sounds together. So it's not so k, at, cat. They're really, you really want to teach them to go k, at. And when they hit each part of their arm, that's when they're kind of switching to the next sound. So it's not that segmented, choppy, sound that you hear. You could also have them do the same thing, but they could use their finger and slide under the word. So if they have a card in front of them or they, wrote the word on their whiteboard, they can do the exact same thing and you can have them, slide it along. And then you can also add some fun manipulatives into that. You could use a little toy car and they drive the car along the track. I've seen lots of different cute things that you can laminate for your students to use as well. But toy car was always one that I know was really fun, especially for my really young students like kinder and first graders when they were first kind of learning how to blend sounds together. So that's the first tip, is incorporating movement. The second tip is you could do successive blending. So this involves stretching the sounds in a word continuously without breaking the flow. So for example, each time you add a sound, they're adding that sound with the previous sound, if that makes sense. I'll do an example. So it says right here, blend more sounds each time. So for example, the word leg, so you can see they start at the first ooh, 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 egg. And even I kind of stopped short with the G. You want to have the students really make sure that, they're just continuing to blend that sound and not chop it off like I kind of did. So when you're doing this with your students, you model and then your students can repeat after you. This strategy helps them hear how the sounds naturally connect. And this strategy works because it really kind of reduces that cognitive load. They don't really have to, break things up so much. They can, they're confident with that first sound. When they move to the second sound, and it's kind of something that they're, really helping to connect the letters and to make them into that word. And this right here is just a fun little center that we have, and I will show you that at the end of the presentation. Another example is continuous blending, and so it's kind of the same as what I showed you with the arm blending. So sometimes that segmenting isn't really enough, so you really want to teach the students to really hold those sounds together. So you can see here, I have it kind of broken down. When you look at the word leg, you have those sounds that they're holding. Egg, app, clap. So really the goal is to smooth and connect those letters together. Sometimes how we model the blending can make a significant difference. So if you've been segmenting sounds with noticeable pauses, your students might end up doing the same. And so sometimes, I know, especially myself, I would get so into the strategy of, okay, let's sound it out. Let's look at the letters. Let's break it down. And I forget that sometimes it's hard to put it back together for students. And so I would have to remind myself to really try not to have too many spaces in between those letters. And so that's why continuous blending can be really powerful, because you're expecting them to stretch the sounds out as they're doing it. Okay. The fourth tip is to practice some final blending. So blending really improves with frequent practice, clear modeling, and low stress repetition, which, as do most things that we're doing with our students when it comes to reading. Automatic blending supports fluent reading, which is what we know. And so final blending really involves combining those sounds incrementally. So the final blending piece is, instead of having your students continuously go through each sound, you're kind of holding the first two sounds together. This works, I'm doing a CVC word example, and then with the lens, you're really working on the same thing, the blends, then the vowel, then the last letter. So for this one, you're thinking leg. And so that putting that ending sound on it allows for breaks it down into like more manageable pieces versus thinking, okay, well, I have 3 letters, so that means I'm going to really stretch these sounds out, and I have 3 sounds that I'm connecting together. Well, if I know the first 2 sounds, here's the word cat, for example, I can blend those 2 sounds, ka, and then I can add the final sound, cat. And so again, it's just allowing them to focus on fewer sounds at a time. So it just really is a different approach you can take to it. All of these tips are, again, just different approaches. Some might work for students. You may prefer one as well that you feel, you're able to model really well for your students. And it might take some practice too. I haven't been in the classroom for a while, but I'm working with my 4-year-old right now and learning to read. And I've kind of had to, remind myself about how these different strategies can work. And I'm also realizing myself that if I'm not constantly modeling a specific way, she's going to model, what she's hearing me do. So again, just, these different tips can work however you best see them fit and whatever you think is best for your students. But I do know for the successive blending and then adding that continuous blending and then the final blending, essentially what we're doing is we're just chunking it into smaller steps. So each of those 3 strategies, they can be used all together. You might want to start with using the successive blending. So, okay, let's take each sound at once, and then we'll add a sound. And then when we go to the continuous blending, okay, let's smoothly put those sounds together. And, again, you can incorporate that movement right here at this part, because when they're looking at the word leg, they've got their toy car and they're sliding across the word leg. And, I have it only one sound on here, but, you can have them say it, for a second longer to kind of remind them that there is that ending sound as well. But also, having that ending sound does allow for them to realize that word is over, and then they, it kind of helps their brain switch to go to the next word too. Okay, and the last tip is, if you're really feeling like some of these strategies are just not working for your students, go back to the basics. Phonological awareness is the ability to hear and manipulate sounds in our spoken language, and this is a foundational skill that really sets the stage for successful blending. So if you have some students that are, really still struggling after trying a few of these tips, I would maybe do a quick little phonological assessment just to kind of see, okay, are there any gaps? Is there anything that I, can do to, is there anything that I could review so that, they can be a little bit, more successful with this blending piece as we move forward. Here's just a little activity that I've used before. So I have a mystery word for you. Listen as I say the sounds. At, what's the word? And so that's encouraging the students to listen carefully and put the sounds together. And then they're blending without the visual in front of them. So students can really concentrate on that auditory aspect of the task. Lots of other phonological awareness activities. We have, things in the membership that you can also use. We have some blog posts as well. So if you do have any tips or any questions, you can always send an email, or you can post it in our Facebook group as well. Okay, so after thinking about those those tips, we have another tool that we like to use, and it's called a blending board. I've seen lots of different variations. This is just an example of a blending board that I've seen in the past, and I know Jenny has used in the past. Jenny created cards for a blending board in our membership. And so the blending board is a hands-on tool that allows the students to see the sounds, and then you touch and move the letters to allow them to be able to blend those into words. So blending boards work because they strengthen phonemic awareness. And I apologize for the spelling error there. That's supposed to say strengthen phonemic awareness. They support multisensory learning, specifically those visual and tactile learners. They increase engagement, and they allow for you to differentiate. So what I would, do with my reading time with my students is, we would be working on a phonics skill whole group, and I would use, I would have the students pull out their whiteboards so they could, excuse me, not whiteboards, their blending boards. We had magnetic blending boards at the district that I was teaching at, and it was, I would say, a little bit more chaotic than I would have liked because the students were messing around with their magnets. But eventually it became a really nice tool to have. But they would do it alongside with me, whole group, and then also in small groups. So I would have, the word projected, and then they would be manipulating the sounds and blending alongside with me too. There are lots of do-it-yourself blending boards. I just put it into YouTube. I said Science of Reading blending board, and there was so many videos that came up. I saw a teacher using sticky notes. I saw just somebody using a virtual blending board where they had it on their screen and they were like manipulating the letters from that. I think UFly has a blending board that is digital as well that you could project to your students. So it doesn't have to look like this. My example here does not look like this either. It's not like the old-fashioned wooden board. You can get them on Amazon, I'm pretty sure though. Okay, so when you use a blending board, the first thing that you will do is you will model. And if you are, doing this for the first time with your students, especially if they're, having their own cards or something with them, you go through the steps of making sure that they're able to kind of play around with it, explore, discover what these tools are, and then, you bring it back together and then you model to kind of do it first. So after you kind of have time to explore, you'll see that there are multiple cards on the blending board. And so that's the whole idea, is that you're manipulating these words and you're allowing students to kind of see the connections between them. If you've done word ladders, it's kind of something similar to that, except for you have that tactile piece where they're manipulating those cards instead of just writing. So as the students are watching you move the letters while you're blending them, the very first thing that I suggest doing is that when you're beginning your blending with your students, you might want to start by reviewing the phonemes that the students will be using. So you can hold up the cards and just do a quick little drill. So you can see right here that this teacher has a C. It looks like these middle cards, they're different colors. So students know that, okay, those were vowels, vowel teams. In this case, we see that there are controlled vowels. And so that might be a really good drill too, is like, okay, we're going to read through our controlled vowels and we're going to go through the sounds together. And then that allows for them to kind of be ready to go. And it doesn't have to be a long thing. It just, like I said, a quick little drill where you're kind of just showing them the cards, they're putting them down. Okay. So after you have done that quick little drill, then it's your turn to model the blending. So you'll place the cards in the blending tray or whatever you decide to use. A little thing right here that I will show you. It's just like this old sound. Used to have these coins for our phonics program where I would have to tap for the coins. And so I would just slide the coins in the slot. And I grabbed this to use for tonight because I didn't have the wooden one. But again, anything you use, it's like a little pocket chart. So if you have a little pocket chart laying around, you could use that too. So once you place the cards in the blending tray, remember to kind of explain to the students that you will be reading from left to right, and then you'll point to each card and say the sound slowly. And so I'll kind of go over that in just a minute and what that looks like. And then after you do that, you can give the students a chance to practice with their own set of cards. Or if your students don't have cards, you're using something virtual, you do it again. And this time it's like whole group call and response. So I do, you do kind of a thing. And then so you'll want to start with, what's the sound, and then go together and blend. And then as you're doing it, you'll swap and build new words. So switch out the beginning, the middle, or the ending card to build a new word. So again, I'll show this just an example. You can also use this for like an encoding piece too. If your students have their own cards, you could say, okay, here's the word, whatever it is, and then they build the word with their cards. Okay. So again, to kind of differentiate the activity with your students is to use color coding cards. I saw online this woman had like different colors for her digraphs than her vowels, and then her just like consonants were different as well too. So, you could have a system that works for you, something you find. Our blending cards in the membership are just like this. So, feel free to print them on colored paper if that fits what you're looking for. And again, it's really important to consider you when you're doing your blending piece to follow the scope and sequence that you follow, move in a natural progression with your students. And, you can't expect your students to be able to blend consonant, vowel, consonant words if they're, not able to blend consonant, vowel, consonant words or CVC words. So just, keep that in mind as, you're planning your lessons and things, which I'm sure all of us already are. And a way that you can really help your multisensory learners is to have some finger tapping or that finger movement, toy car movement, or the arm blending. So, especially if I'm doing it and my students don't have anything in front of them to tap with, and they're just looking at what I'm doing, I would probably have them do the arm blending so that they're able to really make those connections with that aesthetics piece, and it helps them with their orthographic mapping. And again, when you're using the blending board, it's a quick, pace. It's not something where you really want to take a lot of time and, you want them to, you want it to feel like like a drill in a sense where you're listening for what they're saying. And then, you're moving on to the next one. And then when you're in your small groups, you can spend a little bit more time giving some more feedback that may be essential for each student. Okay, so here's my example of a blending board. I believe you can still see me even with the presentation. So I have these already set up, but if I was with, my students, I wouldn't have these already set up because I would do a quick little drill of, okay, here's the letters I'm going to say, and here's the letters that I'm going to use. Let's go through their sounds. Okay, so just for a quick little demonstration. So when I'm using the blending board, I'm going to first model. Okay, so I'm going to think about each sound that I want my students to use. And then I'm going to blend the word together. Okay. In, man. And as I'm doing it, I'm dragging across. My students might be doing their arms. Okay, so I did it. Now it's your turn. And so I'm watching my students. They may be using their arms, or if they have the cards in front of them, they're doing that. Okay, so I'm going to change it. App, map. And then the students do it. Okay, change it again. Add, mad. I could use this as an opportunity to kind of just chunk this beginning part because I'm only changing the ending sound. So I might want to do that strategy that we talked about where they're practicing just that final ending blend. So I might just say, okay, let's try this. Ma. And then I might have them just put that ending sound on. Sometimes it takes me a little bit. I apologize. Mad, mad, mad. Same thing, might chunk that. Okay, now I'm going to change the first sound. Okay, and so I keep on going. We do the word sat. Then I'm like, okay, let's change the middle sound. And then we do the same exact thing. And so having that natural progression, like the word ladders, like I said, allows for you to do those various tips that we talked about, where they're maybe doing the successive blending first, moving into that continuous and that final blending, and they're able to really those together. So a couple different activities you can do with your students. Again, blending boards work well in all sorts of different settings in your classrooms. Whole group modeling, small groups, intervention, literacy centers. So many options out there, again, to do it yourself for blending boards. There are a couple different activities that you can also use these blending boards with your students, especially if you have like centers around the room and maybe you only have like a couple blending boards. Maybe you only have like 4 or something. So you could set it up where your students are doing it during their centers. So students are engaging in word building and they're practicing during their center time. They're able to manipulate the words and create them themselves. This works really well for word families. You could create a blending board that has a word family. So for example, I had the MAN as the beginning, and family, you could just have students changing that first sound. So they're working on the and family. You can use blending boards to help you with phoneme segmentation. And so students, again, can tap alongside or underneath the cards to help them with the individual sounds, and then again, bring those back together. You can also create a syllable blending board as well. So when your students are, at that maybe second grade level and they're working on multisyllabic words and end of first grade, you could put together different syllable cards and blend those together. So for like kitten, you would have the two pieces, and then, they're working at chunking each syllable and then putting them together to form those. You can do the exact same with other phonics skills like digraphs and blends. So, they have like part of the word, but then they're changing out those digraphs or blends. And again, same with vowel teams. So you can really do it with all sorts of different things. Okay, so now that I've kind of probably talked your ear off a little bit with all of this, we have membership resources that we'd love to share with you, so that if this is something that you're like, yes, I really would love to start tomorrow, we have a few things. And the first is those blending cards. We have blending cards for kindergarten, first and second grade, and they have the various go along with the scope and sequence that's in our membership. I was using the kindergarten ones, and I did not laminate them. I would suggest, however, laminating them because they were a little hard to move. But for the purpose of time, if you want to just print them off on cardstock too, I'm sure that would work too. You can find these in SOAR resources in the membership. I had to kind of do a little bit of digging to find them, but underneath resources and then SOR resources is where you will find them. Okay, so we also have some kind of like little scripts for you as well if you want to work on blending phonemes together. So you'll see here, these are just a couple examples. You can find these in the phonemic awareness section of the membership, but these kind of help you have a little bit more of like what to say, and they give you like example words and things to make. So right here, this is 2 syllables in a word. And then right here, we've got 3 and 4 syllable words. And then down over here on the side, I've got blending 3 phoneme sounds, just an example. So you can see right here what your job is, and then what the students say. And then these are the very first card. And then, like I said, there's underneath each of the cards, there's example words for you to do with your students. We also have this little blending CVC like center that you can use, found in the phonemic awareness section. So your students are using this, using these color-coded boxes to help them with each word. So you'll show them the picture. They think, okay, the word is cab, and then they go ahead and they work on cab. They work on doing that without seeing any letters. So this would be a really great example for, maybe some students that need some assistance in the, the phonological phonemic awareness and going back to like the basics. We have successive blending cards as a center as well, and I'm working currently on adding digraphs and beginning and ending blends to the membership. Right now we have CVC. So essentially what you do is your students work on doing the successive blending, and then there's clothespins inside your little baggie or however you have it organized, and they're able to clip the picture to show the word is. So again, when you're doing successive blending, students are really focusing on, taking those pieces and adding a step each time. So the CVC ones, again, are in the membership, found underneath phonemic awareness, underneath blending phonemes. And Jenny will be putting this presentation in the membership so that you have the screenshots available to you to be able to help you with that, help you with finding that. And last but not least, we do have some word mapping activities. So this kind of, I think that word mapping is really beneficial for a lot of things, not necessarily just blending. And I just want to bring it to your attention that we do have word mapping worksheets, and then we have little different like boxes that you can use. These right here, you can see the Elkin and sound boxes. We've got these tapping hands you can print out and use and laminate. These are really helpful because although it's not specifically just for blending, you can use them to kind of really help incorporate that movement piece or that tactile piece with your students. And when students are mapping words, they have to be able to break the word apart and then put it back together, and it helps it store into their long-term memory. So word mapping can be really beneficial, and our word mapping worksheets cover many different skills as far as phonics goes.
One thing I was going to say is, so you know, if you are in here from just the Decodable Readers Vault, these resources are all inside of our Shifting to SOAR membership. So won't have access to those specific resources, but you'll still be able to use a lot of the tips and things that Megan shared tonight. If you are interested in joining the SOAR membership, which does include the Decodable Readers Vault, just send me an email to Jenny, Jennie, at shiftingtosoar.com, and I can get you set up. We could do that. So just a little thing on there. So if you're inside the Decodable Readers Vault looking for those resources, they are not inside of the vault. So again, I want to say thanks for sharing all of this tonight. All right. Well, I thank you guys for showing up. We really appreciate it. And we will see you next time.